Welcome to week 1 of Edge of Eternities for my best of 1, best of 3 standard review. What I do every week is I talk about the top 8 performing archetypes from Diamond to Mythic according to Untapped, which is a third-party tracker. And then I will also talk about the tournament winners in the Magic the Gathering Online tournament, the Standard Challenge, kind of what happened over the weekend, and so let's get into it. So it's, week 1, things are really new. So if you are new to Magic the Gathering, or if you are limited on the amount of wild cards that you have, hold off on crafting for a little bit. There's always a little bit of a settling period. And right now we see that the number 1 spot is Azorius Control. And this is partly because we saw Esper Mill come in and the Azorius Azorius Artifacts build, which, if you're going to go into the control space to answer like Selesnya Rabbits and the go wide strategies, it's nice to have the sweepers, but then it's nice to be able to go deeper on the amount of control that you have if you come up against another control archetype. So the more control we start to see, like Azorius Artifacts and Esper Mill, which we'll talk about here shortly, the better Azorius Control is then positioned in the meta. The counter to Azorius Control, or what usually keeps this archetype in check, is generally aggro, right? So being able to continuously rebuild the board around the sweepers, that has been heavily hit by rotation and the bans to the Monstrous Rage and Heartfire Hero before rotation. So Azorius Control is pretty well positioned right now, kind of no huge surprise there. So if we compare this one to week 5 of Final Fantasy, which was the last time that I talked about Azorius Control, we can see that the archetype has undergone some significant changes. So we're dropping a single copy of the Demolition Field. We're dropping 2 copies of the Restless Anchorage, which is the Manland in Azorius. We're dropping 1 copy of 3 Steps Ahead, as well as 2 copies of the Stock Up, and dropping a Negate. We're dropping a Hornlock Whale, which was kind of a one-of on the top end. Kutzel's Flanker was a one-of that we got dropped here for a little bit of graveyard hate. Noticeably, this one is not running the Beza, the Bounding Spring. That one's more stabilization against aggro, which we're not really seeing a whole lot of. And then Temporary Lockdown we lost in rotation, and we also lost the Seachrome Coast, Jace the Perfected Mind, which was a win condition for this deck, and then Elspeth's Smite. And we didn't lose Elspeth's Smite. We do have it available in Foundations, I believe, but going a different route, because we don't need the Elspeth Smite if there's not a lot of aggro single 1-drops that we're trying to shoot like Heartfire Hero, right? And then we're also dropping the Soul Partitions, which worked better with Jace since you could blink your own Jace for additional value. So instead, we're bringing in the Cathar Commando. This is largely because of Izzet Cauldron. There's a fair amount of artifact and enchantment stuff that's being explored, so there's some decent targets for the Cathar Commando. Time will see if this is actually going to stay in the archetype. I think it's kind of a tech slot, so really feel free to use whatever you feel would slot into this best based off of what you're coming up against. The 2 additional copies of the Get Lost, I think, makes a lot of sense because it gives us that single point removal, gives us enchantment hate, gives us an answer for Kaido if you're coming up against Dimir Midrange, that sort of thing. Running the additional No More Lies, and like I was talking about, the more that we lean into a control versus control meta, the more counterspells that you want to have. So having that 4th copy of the No More Lies, I think, is particularly nice. Now we need new alternative win conditions, because this one's not going for mill. Some of the Azorius builds do. You can go that direction. This one is just deciding to go with the Overlord of the Mistmoors and Elspeth, so leaning a little bit more into the token synergies. We're running 3 total copies of Ultima, so 2 more than the one in Final Fantasy, and this is really because of the Azorius Artifacts or Jeskai Artifacts, since a lot of them are running the Fire Crystal, Ultima being a really good answer for that deck. And then we've just got some filler 3 islands, 3 plains, and because we did lose a little bit of the Azorius lands, which hopefully we'll see in the next coming set. And then Consult the Star Chart is a new card that we got in Edge of Eternities, and I think this is a great memory deluge, right? You can cast it twice. It allows you to dig for that thing that you need. What tool do you need to answer your opponent's stuff? consult the star charts is definitely a nice one for that. And then we have Seam Up, which is kind of like, instead of running the Elspeth Smite, it allows you to hit things that aren't just attacking you, though, too. So you can use it against your opponent's Agatha's Soul Cauldron, for example, right? Or actually, that's a bad example, because that's 3. But anyway, it allows you to hit non-land permanents that cost 2 or less. So we're seeing a lot of Seam Rip being explored, and I think over time maybe we'll see Elspeth Smite kind of sneak back in. But for right now, this seems to be a very important sorcery speed removal that you can kind of, in some decks too, you can manipulate, like... Anyway, we'll see where this ends up. I don't think this is its final form by any means. I hope I can convey that to people who are new. Hold off on crafting, I would say, at least until week 2 or week 3, if you are limited on wildcards. So the other thing that I do is I like to talk about the matchups in case you're wondering what beats this deck. And right now, this one's favored against mono green landfall, which a lot of the tools that we got in Final Fantasy, none of them rotated. So a lot of people have been gravitating to the mono green landfall deck. And it's not going to make it into the top 8 this week because of how many decks are kind of geared up against the most popular pick. It's not a bad deck. You can definitely take it to Mythic. Just because it's not in the top 8 does not mean that it's a bad deck. Jeskai Artifacts, it's also favored against, and is partly why I think we see it positioned in the number 1 spot this week, because we basically saw a surge, and then we saw Jeskai Artifacts come in as a way to answer like Mono White Lifegain and Selesnya Rabbits, and then this deck answers that. And the counter to this strategy right now, as far as establishing the rock, paper, scissors, is the Orsov Sephiroth deck, which is kind of like the Raise the Pests or Raise the Past, which we won't cover this week. Hopefully we will eventually cover it. I'll try to cover it in Meta Breakers if I can get around to it. It has some tough matchups. It's a lot of fun, though, to play. And the other thing, too, is that if you are new to Magic the Gathering, I like to give you some guidance on what you're looking to do with your opening hand as far as your mulligan strategy goes. And the top performing cards in your opening hand are No More Lies, Authority of the Consuls, if you are deciding to run it. A lot of the lists I've seen have decided not to run it, but it is a good card in your opening hand. It's a little bit of a dud, though, if you're coming up against another like Esper Mill deck, then it's a whiff, right? The Pinnacle Star Cage is in that same boat. Some are running it. It depends on if you're coming up against a lot of bunnies or if you're coming up against a lot of other control. So the Pinnacle Star Cage is another one that I expect to perform better at the lower ranks, worse the higher up into Mythic that you get. And then Day of Judgment is another one that's good to have to wipe the board. All right, and now to do just a quick little plug. If you are new here, welcome. Please consider becoming a YouTube member. It is the best way to help support me if you do like this sort of thing every week. It helps keep my spirits strong, and I appreciate those who are YouTube members, so thank you for your support. You can also drop by on Twitch and drop a Prime sub if you have Amazon Prime. There's multiple ways. Patreon if you don't like the YouTube system and whatnot. All that fun stuff. So, second place in Tier 2, which means it's a standard deviation below Tier 1, still very viable to take to Mythic, is Selesnya Rabbits. And this is another one that was very well positioned post-rotation, basically just losing the Knight Errant of Eos, and maybe, I guess some of the lands, the fixing kind of got hurt for Selesnya Rabbits. Still relatively good to, off to the races with. So if we compare this one to week 5 of Final Fantasy, we see that we have tweaked the lands. We can't afford to run as many like Oak Hollow Villages and Cavern of Souls and things like that because we lost a lot of the green-white fixing. We're also dropping 2 copies of the Sheltered by Ghosts. This one was better against the mono red since we don't really see it. We saw a dip in mono red. Mono red will be back, I promise. Sheltered by Ghosts, I think, dropped down for a little bit. We'll see if it comes back. 4 copies of Brushland and the 4 copies of Razor Verge Thicket were the Pain Land and the Fast Land that we lost for this archetype. The Knight Errant of Eos rotated, the Cavern of Souls, the 2 copies got rotated out, as I mentioned, and then the Season of the Burrow was one of that was run at the 5 slot, kind of gave a little bit of top end for this deck if you did flood out. That one's been dropped as well. So we're running an additional copy of Phineas Ace Archer. This one's really nice if you can go turn 1 Valley Might Caller, turn 2 Phineas Ace Archer, turn 3 hop to it, pump all of your bunnies and draw a card. That sort of line is particularly nice with Phineas. And then we're also bringing in the 4 copies of the Hushword Verge. The Verge lands have to be used a little bit more to accept the fact that we've lost some of the fixing. So this does not have the 14 sources to have a green source on turn 1, which makes it a little bit harder to reliably 90% of the time have the green source for the Valley Might Caller. You may want to consider tweaking that if you want to. I think one of the strongest lines in the deck is to start with the Valley Might Caller, so just keep that in mind. The other one, too, is we're bringing in the 3 copies of the Bright Glass Gear Hulk. And this one's kind of a fun one to use with the Seam Rip, any of your 1-drops, being able to search your library for up to 2 artifact, creature, or enchantment cards with mana value 1 or less. So it gives you a little bit of, like, tutorable removal, and definitely being explored right now. And then we've also got 2 plains and 5 forests, again, because we kind of have to. And then we have the 2 Seam Rips to go with the Bright Glass Gear Hulk. So it's a coin flip against mono green landfall, not particularly bad there, but this deck does struggle against the Jeskai Artifacts build. Not doing particularly well if you're up against any form of temporary lockdown, or the Star Cage, which I will eventually stop calling temporary lockdown. The opening hand, you're looking for Valley Might Caller, Phineas Ace Archer, the Valley Quest Caller, and the Seasoned Wearing Guard. Paw Patch Recruit is a little bit less important than it was in the pre-rotation meta, because in the pre-rotation meta, single point interaction was more common. So you were trying to punish mono black, for example, for targeting your early threats. And right now we're seeing a lot more sweepers, where the Paw Patch Recruit is just less well positioned. Okay, number 3 is Esper Mill, also in Tier 2. The rest of them are all going to be in Tier 2. So this one is a new archetype. You may have bumped into it. It's kind of decreased already a little bit in its peak popularity. It's kind of come down a little bit from the very first couple of moments, if you will, of Edge of Eternities. The whole point of this deck is the Singularity Rupture, mills half of your library, your opponent's library, destroys all creatures, and then players each mill half of their library rounded down, which pairs particularly nicely with the River Turn Monument, which does half of your opponent's library as well. Or I should say, any number of mills cards equal to the number of cards already in their graveyard. So if it's half their library, it will be half their library again. So we don't have Jace, but mill is still very accomplishable. And then we also have the Space-Time Anomaly, which mills equal to your life total. So there's a couple of different ways to hit for big amounts of mill. And if you're up against another mill strategy, then this can kind of help you against, like, this strategy is favored against Azorius Control, because Azorius Control has a harder time. If you get the River Turn Monument down, they basically have to, it's difficult for them to deal with. So you're similar, and then you just have a whole bunch of threats similar to the Azorius Control. Sorry, that wasn't my best spoken. Anyway, so we're running Shoot the Sheriff instead of, in addition to Get Lost for the single point interaction. We still have the Day of Judgments. We're not running the Star Cage, but we have the Authority of the Consuls, so you can kind of see like a different mix and match as far as the tech goes. Feel free to tweak this to your heart's content, right, for whatever you're looking at. Beza helps stabilize against the aggro matchups. Again, I don't think that this is the final form of Esper Mill either. And as far as the archetypes go, though, it is favored against a good spread of the meta right now. It's favored against Mono Green Landfall, Jeskai Artifacts, Mono Black Demons, Azorius Control, and then it's weak to the Orsov Sephiroth build. So hopefully you're starting to see the rock, paper, scissors. And the opening hand, though, you're looking for the Pinnacle Star Cage if you are running it. This one is not running it. Day of Judgment to wrap the board. And then Authority of Consuls is a nice one to have in your opening hand, as well as the Shoot the Sheriff. This is really in here to slow things down at the early part of the game, and then wipe the big threats with your Wraths. All right, and this is the one that I'm calling Jeskai Artifacts. It's technically Azorius Artifacts, white-blue. It has the Fire Crystal as a way that you can step to it with the Repurposing Bay to give all of your big dudes haste immediately. And we saw this being explored a little bit before we went into Edge of Eternities, and Dr. Ruckus did a wonderful video on it. I think actually this is Dr. Ruckus's list from what I can tell, because you've got the both of the planets are being run. If you don't have the wild cards, I don't think the planets are necessary. They do help. They are, if you're stationing, you get these really big creatures that can immediately station them, which helps if the game goes long. So they give you some additional value, and the tap lands aren't bad if you do feel like crafting them. So if we compare this one, we have to go back to week 4 of Final Fantasy. So Jeskai Artifacts was struggling a little bit, even against the post-rotation mono red. And so the reason why I'm talking about what was ditched is so that if you are kind of completely unfamiliar with the archetype, it may give you some ideas that you might have of your own. So, like, we used to be running 2 Fomori Vaults. This one now is only running 1. You could bring in 2 if you have it. It helps you with the dig. The problem with it is that it's a colorless land, right? Glass Casket was... all 4 copies of Glass Casket have been taken out. We lost the Darker Wastes and the Seachrome Coasts. This one's not running 3 steps ahead. Some people like to run the counterspell that can also copy your artifacts. It works pretty well in this archetype. We're dropping the Mightstone and Weakstone. We're dropping the Thousand Moon Smithy, the World Waker Helm. All of these little one-ofs that have been included in some Azorius or Jeskai artifact ones. Mistrise Village makes it so that they can't counterspell your Simulating Synthesizer. It makes it more expensive to do, though, so it's not hugely important to have. But if you're really playing up against a lot of control, you might want to consider it. We've also ditched the 2 Soul Guide Lanterns because Graveyard Hate isn't as important as it was prior to rotation. We've dropped 2 of the Restless Anchorages, which is the Manland in Azorius. We've dropped 2 Fabrication Foundries. Fabrication Foundries are a way to ramp up into your other drops, and then can be used with the Repurposing Bay. Same with the Torpor Orb. Torpor Orb is a mythic, I think, that for 2 colorless prevents your creatures from having ETB effects. So if you're coming up against a lot of ETB effects like Bazes and things like that, you can bring in the Torpor Orb. That has been explored as well. And this one is bringing in the Fabled Passage to give us a little bit of fixing. The 4th copy of the Spring-Loaded Saw Blades. 4 copies of the Clay-Fired Bricks. I like Clay-Fired Bricks. Some lists decide to ditch it. It all just depends on kind of how you want to build the deck. If you're leaning more towards the Starcage on 3, which I think you should, then the Clay-Fired Bricks helps you secure that 3 white, even if you're running kind of a little bit lower white count than you would necessarily need to hit this without the draw, if that makes sense. We've also got an additional copy of the Braided Net, giving you a little bit of that single point interaction where you can slow them down and then eventually draw with it. It's a nice one to tap, and then once you're kind of out of juice, you can then use Repurposing Bay to discard to sacrifice your Braided Net to go grab the Fire Crystal. That sort of line works pretty well. And then sorry, I keep losing my spot. So we also have the 4 copies of the Starting Town. As I talked about in my rotation guide, Starting Town is basically what we're going to use in the archetypes that lost a lot of their fixing. So I'm not sure if the Starting Town was... I didn't point it out in Esper Mill, but like this is really good fixing right now for the time being. I think in the long run, it'll be interesting to see if whether or not this becomes a staple or if we start using more of the shock lands that hopefully we'll get the rest of in the next one. Okay, so we've got the Clay-Fired Bricks, we've got the Braided Net, we've got the 2 additional copies of the Repurposing Bay, so this one's leaning more heavily into the Repurposing Bay plan, which makes sense because we've got more stuff to hit with the Repurposing Bay. Starting Towns, we've got the 1 additional Fire Crystal, which I already talked about, which gives you everything haste. You've got the Uthros, the planets. You've got 3 additional planes. Got the 2 white planets as well, and then we've got the 4 Cryogenic Relic. If you have not done this yet, by the way, it triggers when it leaves the battlefield to draw a card, so you don't necessarily need to do the 1 in a blue to sacrifice it, part of it. You play it on 2, right, and then when you wipe the board later, it draws you a card again, and then if they answer your Starcage, or you craft your Starcage into the Fire Crystal, or whatever you end up doing, right, when it comes back into play, you get the draw again. So you can actually get a fair amount of draw off of these Cryogenic Relics, and it's really cool. And then we have the 4 copies of the Pinnacle Starcage, and this really works almost better than the Temporary Lockdown did in this archetype because of being able to bounce your previous artifacts. So kind of giving you that almost like Esper Pixie kind of vibe. It is favored against mono green landfall. It's favored against Orzhov Sephiroth, and that this is the deck that's keeping the Orzhov Sephiroth out of the top 8 because it is a very popular pick. It's favored against Izzet Prowess, Mono Black Demons, which is what Mono Black has become after all of its removal was removed. And then it's weak against Azorius Control. So Azorius Control is in the #1 spot, largely to counter this deck, which we saw a big spike in. Things will settle differently over time. So the opening hand, we know this deck, it's not anything new, so you're looking for the United Battlefront. This one is like the card that makes the whole thing shine, in addition to the Simulacan Synthesizer. If you're deciding to run the Authority of Consuls, which is an enchantment, not an artifact, some lists do run it because it does tap your opponent's stuff and then gives you a better potential target lineup for the spring-loaded Saw Blades. Just something to consider. Some lists do run the Authority of the Consuls. We also have the 4 copies of the Clay-Fired Bricks. These are good to look for in your opening hand. And then the Simulacan Synthesizer is the name of the game. You are trying to craft into this or play this card. This is how you win. All right, number 5 is Mono Red Aggro, and if we compare this one to Week 5 of Final Fantasy, we see very little has changed. 4 copies of the Monastery Swiftspear have rotated and have been replaced with the Get2 Lava Runner. Now, I would like to say that my suggestion of running the Clockwork Percussionist has a higher win rate, but a lower sample size. We'll see if the Clockwork Percussionist is the better 1-drop. This one does work. I've tried both. I think they both have their pros and cons, as always. So this deck has been around for a while. If you're unfamiliar with it, you will be familiar with it soon enough. So it's favored against Mono Green Landfall, Jeskai Artifacts, and Izzet Prowess. It's a coin flip against the Orzhov Sephiroth and the Mono Black Demons, and it's weak against Azorius Control. So if everybody goes to Azorius Control right now, Mono Red Aggro might struggle a little bit. Again, Mono Red Aggro used to be kind of the counter, or at least a closer to a coin flip for Azorius Control. We'll see how it goes, right? But for the time being, it's not well positioned against Azorius Control, who is ready to blow your Slickshot Show Off out of the sky. Sorry, I almost forgot. The cards you're looking for in your opening hand are your 1-drops like Hired Claw. If you're running the Dreadmaw's Ire, it's actually pretty well positioned right now because of all the artifacts, giving you a little bit of artifact hate. Definitely consider it as a combat trick. It gives +2/+2 and trample, and then if you damage somebody, it destroys an artifact. So you can blow up the Simulacan Synthesizers. If you are running that, it's good in your opening hand. You've got the Screaming Nemesis, which is right now a pretty good one to have, especially against certain matchups. And then the Viashino Pyromancer is another 1-drop that we've seen some people exploring, and if you are running that one, or the Clockwork Percussionist, that sort of thing, starting on 1 with a threat is a good plan. All right, we're on to number 6, which is Boros Burn, and we have to go back to Week 2 of Tarkir to talk about Boros Burn. And the upside of it's kind of like Mono Red, but then you're playing white so that you can play the Boros Charm and the Lightning Helix. You know, take it or leave it. So if we compare it to that list from before, it is dropping 3 mountains, it's dropping 4 shocks, it's dropping 4 lightning strikes, so it's taking a little bit of the burn aspect out of it away. We lost the 4 Monastery Swiftspears in rotation. We lost the Abraded Bluffs, which was the Fastland or the Painland? Anyway, we lost the Battlefield Forge, it's the Painland. There you go. And then we have the 2 additional copies of the Slickshot Show Off. I think this is the reason to be in red, really. I think this is kind of like if your opponent isn't ready to play interaction around the Slickshot Show Off, you can do a devastating amount of damage to your opponent. And then the Emberheart Challenger, giving us a little bit more of the prowess threats. Similar to the Selesnya Rabbits, we're going to have to lean on the Verge lands a little bit more. So we've got the Sunbillow Verge. And then we've also got the Grease Wrench Goblin. And this is another one that if you want to run this one in the mono red spot, I've seen this in best of 3 for mono red. Grease Wrench Goblin is also a good one. We'll see which one takes the Monastery Swiftspear in the long run, the spot of, that is. We've also got 2 copies of the Starting Town. Again, pretty good fixing for the time being. Opera Love Song, we typically see more in best of 3 than we do in best of 1. It slows the tempo down, but gives you a little bit of dig if you need additional resources. It also can hit an incredibly hard if you are running the Manifold Mouse, but this one is not. If you have some form of, I guess with the double strike, you can end up with the Boros Charm, you can hit for a fair amount of damage with the Opera Love Song. And then we've got 4 copies of the Sacred Foundry, bringing in the Shockland to kind of help us out with the fixing. And then we've got 3 copies of Nova Hellkite, and this is a new card that we got in Edge of Eternities, and in draft, this card is disgusting. I think it's pretty good and constructed too, right? So you warp it in for a 4/5 flying haste that deals 1 damage to a creature. So you can pop Screaming Nemesis for 1 and make it so that they can't gain life, that sort of thing. And then you could later play it for 5 to hit for a 4/5 that does it again. So some attention being shown towards the Nova Hellkite. Definitely a contender for being here for the long run. And this one's a little bit of a low sample size. It's not the most popular archetype. A lot of people are just running the mono red version, so we have a low amount of matchup data. But I can tell you that you're looking for your 1-drops like Hired Claw, Grease Wrench Goblin, the Emberheart Challenger, and the Slick Shot Show Off. Remember, threats are better for repetitive damage than having a bunch of burn in your hand like the Bolt Waves and the Burst Lightnings. You need to get your damage in over several turns, which is where the creatures are advantaged. Okay, and we're on to number 7, which is Dimir Midrange. And Dimir Midrange had a lot of its black removal lost, but you can kind of put pieces together back with, like, instead of go for the throat, you've got shoot the sheriff, right? Like, there's still functionally a mono black deck, and there's still functionally a Dimir Midrange deck. So again, this strategy is typically more popular in best of 3 than it is in best of 1, but it is still relatively favored in best of 1 because of its matchup with mono green landfall. So let's talk about what has happened here. So we have to go back to week 4 of Final Fantasy. Again, if I'm comparing it to week 4, you can kind of tell it wasn't the top meta pick prior to rotation because it had a bad matchup, right? So anyway, this one lost 1 Duress, 1 Spell Pierce, the 2 Spyglass Sirens, a Deep Cavern Bat, Shield of the Apocalypse, 1 Gix's Command, 1 Anoint with Affliction, 1 Fountain Port, 3 Cut Downs, 3 Go for the Throats, and 3 Preacher of the Schisms, 4 Underground Rivers, and 4 Dark Slick Shores. So a lot of those rotated. One of the ones that I think really stands out is the Preacher of the Schism. Some lists are deciding to run that. Oh, shoot. This is I made a mistake. Hold up. Okay, sorry about that. What I realized is that I was looking at the wrong Dimir Midrange list, because there are 2 right now. So this one is not running the Preacher of the Schism. It's dropping a single one of the Kaidos. We're having a whole bunch of things that rotated out. Not running into Duress, even though we could be running that in Edge of Rotation or Edge of Eternities. Instead, though, what we're doing here is, and we're running like 2 copies of Cecil instead of 4. These are kind of the decisions that you have to decide which way you want to go. So the fixing, though, Watery Grave is here to stay. This is a good craft. The Shocklands from Edge of Eternities are definitely going to be nice. The Soulstone Sanctuaries give a little bit of manlands if you're coming up against a lot of sweepers. We've got the island. We've got 2 copies of the Tishana's Tidebinder. This one is good if you're up against like Izzet Cauldron, anything that is an artifact creature or planeswalker that has a triggered effect or activated ability. We've got 1 additional Phantom Interference, take it or leave it. Faebloom Trick. Some lists are deciding to ditch the fairies because we lost the Fairy Mastermind, so the Faebloom Trick. It depends on if you want to go for like a critical mass and then run the Spell Stutters. This one's not doing that. The Faebloom Trick's nice against the mirror match of Dimir Midrange in best of 3. The likelihood of bumping into Dimir Midrange in best of 1 seems a little bit lower to me, but obviously it depends on what you're experiencing. And then the 2 Cecils, again, sometimes we're running this at 4. The in best of 3, Mogged was running 4 of them, but had ways with the the Cryptomancer that we lost from Neon Dynasty as a way to protect the Cecil Dark Knight. So if you are running a full playset of Cecil, you may want to think about ways of protecting it, or running more additional counterspells, since when it flips into the lifelink, it's really nice to be able to not just have your opponent remove it. We've got the 2 starting towns, which is, again, fixing that's pretty safe to craft. We've got the Bitter Triumph, which we'll see if more people lean into the Bitter Triumphs over the Shoot the Sheriffs. Time will tell. The upside to this is obviously that it can hit Planeswalkers. We've got 1 copy of Nowhere to Run. Depends on how much we see Sheltered by Ghosts. I think given enough time, we're going to see Sheltered by Ghosts return as a problem, but we'll see. We've got the 3 copies of Shoot the Sheriff, which I think is a decent craft because it's going to basically be the replacement to Go for the Throat, as far as I can tell. And then we've got the Tragic Trajectory. This one is a little bit harder to tell if it's going to be around for the long run because it is sorcery speed. It gives -2/-2, but if you've killed something else, it gives -10/-10. Or I should say more accurately, if a non-land permanent has left the battlefield, which can include you shooting your opponent's creatures, that can be good. And then also I think it works with ninjutsu, right? If a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, your thing leaves the battlefield with ninjutsu when you replace it, right? So I think that will trigger the void. Let me know in the comments below. I actually haven't play tested that, but I think that's how that would work. And then we've got 2 additional swamps. So this archetype, the reason why it's in the top 8 is because it's good against mono green landfall. If you're coming up against a lot of mono green landfall and you have basically the old Dimir deck, run it with some form of your choice of black removal. It's weak though against the Jeskai Artifacts, which if you're me, you've been playing about 50% of the time. The opening hand, you're looking for your Spyglass Siren. Like I mentioned before when I was listing all of that, there are some lists that are leaning further away from the Spyglass Siren into the Kaido ninjutsu line. And so, take that as you will. I like the one that has 4 copies of the Spyglass Siren because it's your best card in your opening hand. But you've also got Cecil Dark Knight, which is a good one to have, and this one's only running 2. So if you want the ultimate best opening hands, you would run 4 of each. And then Phantom Interference is actually pretty good to have in your opening hand as well. So, and then Preacher of the Schism is the 4th performing card in your opening hand, and I think I like it better. I think I like personally the Preacher of the Schism more than the Faebloom Trick, but it depends on what matchups you're coming up against. So, hope that helps. Okay, and I'm almost done with my ramblings. This episode's going to go long because it is the first one after rotation, so there's lots to talk about. Mono White Lifegain is in 8th place. A buddy of mine hit Mythic number 35 in 24 hours with the Mono White Lifegain. Like, you can definitely take this one to Mythic. When I was playing it, though, I was struggling because every single game I was coming up against a sweeper, and it was getting really old. So, again, kind of just have to tweak it based off of what you're experiencing on the ladder personally. So, this one, all we lost is this 2 copies of Sarah Paragon during rotation. Instead of running the 4 copies of the Exemplar of Light, which is what I suggested to do, this one is running the 2 copies of the Banishing Light, which, similar to Sheltered by Ghosts, just gives you a little bit of like, oh, we can play this to remove their Star Cage and get some of our stuff back, right? It's favored against Mono Green Landfall, it's favored against Orsov Sephiroth, it's favored against Izzet Prowess. This is another reason why the Orsov Sephiroth deck is not in the top 8, is that this was pretty popular on like day 1 last week. It's a coin flip against Mono Black, and it used to be kind of weak against Mono Black, which is why we brought in the Sarah Paragons. So since Mono Black did take a hit, Mono White might, get your reps in while you can, because I think eventually we're going to start seeing the Mono White Lifegain dip out of the top 8. That's my hypothesis. And then it is weak against Jeskai Artifacts. That's the deck that I've been playing against so much that I can't run the Mono White Lifegain build. It's also weak against Azorius Control. So if you're like me, you're going to be playing up against a lot of control, and get ready for the control versus control matchup. Look for stuff that's countering the Azorius Control in High Diamond and High Mythic. Or High Diamond and Mythic. And then opening hand, you're looking for the Leyline of Hope. You're looking for your Essence Channeler. You're looking for your Rune Lurker Bat, and you're looking for Halea Guided by Light if you are looking for something from Edge of Eternities to kind of tweak this deck a little bit. I've hearted that so many times, and it still comes in as the 4th copy. Anyway, Halea Guided by Light is a decent option. As see, look, I even have the heart on here. It's so annoying. Anyway, I guess while I have it up, let me pull up Halea for you guys, if I can type. So this is the one that's been being explored from Edge of Eternities. Works pretty well in this archetype. Whenever it or another when Halea or another creature or artifact you control enters, you gain 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card if you've gained 3 or more life this turn. So it's kind of like the Exemplar of Light. Could be worth exploring if you don't like the Banishing Lights. Okay, and really I should have broken this up into one best of 1 and one best of 3 this week, but I'll try to get through best of 3 as quickly as I can, because most of it is talking about Izzet Cauldron. And there was a question, was it going to be Dimir Midrange, was it going to be Izzet Cauldron post-rotation? Dimir Midrange lost a whole bunch of its interaction that it was used to running, whereas Izzet Cauldron was largely unaffected, right? So I don't think it's surprising to see a lot of Izzet Cauldron in week 1. I think going forward, it's definitely not going to be just all Izzet Cauldron. Maybe it will, but I'm guessing it'll kind of dim down a little bit. This week, I want to say that five out of the top 8 finishing spots in the weekend tournaments were Izzet Cauldron. So take that, interpret that how you want. So Izzet Cauldron by Soulstrong took down first place on one of the standard standard challenge this weekend. Sorry. So if we compare this one to week 5 of Final Fantasy, we can see that they have. So we lost the Shivan Reef, we lost the Painland for blue-red, but this one also dropped the Spell Pierce, Shore Up, 1 copy of the Glacial Dragon Hunt, 1 copy of Wild Ride, 2 copies of the Voldaren Thrill Seeker. The Voldaren Thrill Seeker was a way to combo off and kind of win in 1 turn. I think we lost that one during rotation. So that there were some things that were lost in this archetype. We're running an additional Torch the Tower, bringing in a Steam Core Scholar, which we saw kind of in the... We've seen come and go throughout the weeks. Was originally like kind of in the Jeskai Oculus build that then kind of molded into this build over time. It's really interesting to watch last year. For those who are nerdy, like me. We've got a island and a mountain. We've also brought in 2 copies of the Draconautics Engineer. And I don't remember who it was in the chat, in the comments last week that was talking about liking to run the Draconautics Engineer. I think this works really well in this archetype. Being able to get that counter on it on its own, and then being able to give your stuff haste can be quite relevant, depending on how good you are at building just an absolutely massive creature off of your Prophecy Memory kind of loop with the Vivi and the Cauldron. So I'm assuming you kind of know this deck. If you're completely new to Best of 3, you will know this deck very soon. But anyways, it's a combo deck. What else is so we're also running an additional Tursa. Tursa can kind of trigger the Prophecy Memory kind of thing, becoming a 5/5 with tokens on it, or counters on it, which trigger the Soul Cauldron if you have the Prophecy Memory. Fire Magic is a 1 of in here, just helps with go wide strategies, and then we've got the Starting Town to kind of replace the fact that we lost the Shivan Reef. So the Best of 3 sideboard also got a pretty substantial rework. So we're dropping the Fairy Masterminds because they rotated, Unable to Scream, Lithomanic Barrage, Negate, Torch the Tower, Twin Moss Stormbrood. We're bringing in a Null, which is a new one that we got in Edge of Eternities. It's a reprint, but counter target artifact or enchantment spell for 1. And since we're seeing enough of this deck, a Null, I think, is a decent one to have in the sideboard, bring it in during the mirror match. Spell Pierce. Whoa, laggy, sorry. Spell Pierce, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Also a good one for the Soul Cauldron. We've got the Mage Bane Lizard, which is good for any of the decks that are trying to double spell, which this one is. And then we've got Ral Crackling Wit, which is nice for like mono-white tokens. That's anything that's running a Wrath. The white Wraths are Usually you bring in a Planeswalker against the White Wraths, since the White Wraths don't hit Ral. And then we have the Broadside Barrage. And this one is kind of instead of the Twin Maw Stormbrood, Scorching Shot or whatever, like it fills that slot of 5 damage to target creature. This one giving you the draw card and discard a card as just kind of an upside. I'm not sure that the Broadside Barrage is here to stay. We'll see. Okay, the second version of Izzet Cauldron was by Barasa Torre. And if we compare this one to the previous list, we can see that they dropped a Torch the Tower, Into the Floodmaw, a Braid, Fire Magic, the 3 Tursa Light Shatters, so none of those, and the 2 starting towns. And instead we're bringing in 2 copies of the Thundering Falls, which is the Surveil land. We didn't lose that one. We're bringing in 3 copies of the Steamcore Scholar, and so leaning fully into a full playset of this one. Works well in the strategy. We like I've said, we've seen it kind of come and go. This one instead of is bringing in the Glacial Dragon Hunt instead of cutting it. It gives you some single point interaction, depends on how important that is in your matchups. And then it's running Plasma Bolt, which I think is a decent enough removal. We'll see if it stays in the long term for a little bit of spot removal as well. So the best of 3 sideboard, we've got 2 less Spell Pierce, 2 less Magebane Lizards, 1 less Annul. So a lot less tech against specifically the other Izzet Cauldron decks. And instead we're running Negates for against Control. We're running Torch the Tower against aggro matchups, Into the Floodmaw, which can bounce sweepers. And then we've got the 3rd copy of the Fire Magic. Instead of starting 1 in the main, we've got all 3 on the sideboard if we're up against a go wide strategy. All right, the 3rd version of Izzet Cauldron was by Casa, and is, if we compare it to Soulstrong's list, is dropping a Thundering Falls and 1 Fire Magic to bring in a Braid. So this is another tech against the Agatha Soul Cauldron, and then bringing in an additional starting town. The best of 3 sideboard, we've got the a Braid down 1, Broadside Barrage down 1, and cutting both copies of the Magebane Lizard to bring in an additional copy of Annul as a way to kind of hate on the mirror match. We've also got a copy of the Obliterating Bolt. This one is good for like Preacher of the Schism, Enduring Curiosity, any of the old targets. It's kind of an older tech, but it checks out. And then we've got the Torch the Tower. Again, this one's helpful for any of the aggro matchups to slow them down a little bit. And then we've got the Twin Maw Stormbrood as a removal that can kind of cycle back into the deck, and is giving you that easier to cast than Broadside Barrage, but doing the same thing, 5 damage to target creature without flying. Okay, so the entirety of Best of 3 is not made up of Izzet Cauldron, just mostly. And we've seen Mono Red Aggro by Denise Vitch, also in the tournament winners. So if we compare this one, we have to go back to week 1 of Final Fantasy. So it's been a little bit since rotation hit this deck pretty hard. We're dropping a Witchstalker Frenzy, a Rockface Village, 4 Monstrous Rage, and 4 Heartfire Heroes were banned. The 4 copies of Opera Love Song have been ditched, and the 3 copies of the Magebane Lizard, which was a tech against the Izzet Prowess deck at the time. We're bringing in the 4 copies of the Burst Lightning, which is just the strictly better shock from Foundations. We're bringing in 2 copies of Inti, Cynical of the Sun. Helps us fix our draws, is a decent threat. 2 copies of the Sunspine Lynx leans, hates on all of the 3-color decks like Izzet Cauldron. 2 copies of Kellen, Planar Trailblazer. It's an alternative threat. I think we can do better, personally. But if they're not answering it particularly well, Kellen can get out of control. We've also got 2 mountains being brought in, and then the 3 copies of the Grease Wrench Goblin, which something's got to replace the Monastery Swiftspear. And then we have 2 copies of the Tursa Light Shatter, which, along with Inti, can kind of just give you getting rid of excess lands. So the best of 3 sideboard, we've got a little bit of a rework as well. So we lost the Lithomantic Barrage, the Scorching Shot, both copies of Ghost Vacuum, Torch the Tower, Witchstalker Frenzy, Magebane Lizard, and 4 copies of Sunspine Lynx. To bring in 2 copies of Pyroclasm. So instead of running Fire Magic, running Pyroclasm does a similar thing. Obliterating Bolts, we're running 2 copies of as the single point interaction. We're running 2 Chandras as the answer to White Wraths. We're running 2 Draconautics Engineers in the sideboard. Also good for Wraths because you can play it and give everything haste. Then you've got 3 copies of Suplex to give you the artifact hate if you are up against the Izzet Cauldron deck. And then we have 2 copies of the Nova Hellkite, which, similar to Best of One, we're exploring this as an alternative threat. I think this one is somewhat appealing, personally. All right, Dimir Midrange by Sokos13 dropped the Tishana's Tidebinder, dropped one of the Cecils, so this one running 1 instead of 2. We're dropping all of the cut downs, the Underground Rivers, the Darkslit Shores, those all rotated. Fairy Mastermind rotated, Go for the Throat. Shieldred's Edict, I think we still have? No, we're losing that one too. Cyber Cryptomancer we lost, and then Anoint with Affliction we lost. So all of those cards that rotated. The replacements are leaning back into the Deep Cavern Bat, which we saw some Dimir Midrange exploring, some not. Mogged, I think, ditched the Bat, personally, if I remember correctly. We've also got the 4 copies of Preacher of the Schism. Again, this one kind of helps stabilize against aggro matchups, traditionally. It's worse off against the longer decks, the longer the game's going. We've got a Bitter Triumph as a one of. We've got the 3 copies of Shoot the Sheriff, which we saw kind of reflected in the Best of One decks that are being explored for Best of 3. Phantom Interference going up to 2 as well. We've got the 1 copy of Nowhere to Run. We've got the full playset of Enduring Curiosity, an additional Swamp, the 3 starting towns, 4 copies of the Watery Grave for the Shockland, and then we have 2 copies of the Tragic Trajectory. So you can see a lot of what's been explored in Best of One is either coming from Best of 3 or people in Best of 3 are exploring it in Best of One. Either way, some similarities there. And then we have the Best of 3 sideboard. We're dropping a Negate, Ghost Vacuum, Anoint with Affliction, 2 Gix's Command, and the 4 Preacher of the Schism to bring in Duress. Duress is good if you're coming up against things like Azorius Control. Disdainful Stroke is a classic one for... Anyway, anything with a mana value 4 or greater that you care about countering. Annul to hate on is the Izzet Cauldron deck. The End for anything that's has a single critical piece to their plan. Tishana's Tidebinder also works up against the Izzet Cauldron decks. The additional copy of Shoot the Sheriff if they're weak to single point interaction. Nowhere to Run if they're running something with lots of hexproof reward. We've got the 1 Faebloom Trick, which I like in the mirror match against other Dimir Midrange. And then we have the Intimidation Tactics. And I kind of thought this was going to see more play since we lost the cut down. I was curious to see if we have more Intimidation Tactics. So if you're up against something that's running a lot of artifacts or creatures, like Izzet Cauldron, then I think that Intimidation Tactics is pretty well positioned. Alright, so Izzet Cauldron by Yulo was the exact same list as Soulstrong. This one is another list by Soulstrong, this time on Sunday's tournament. And you can see that he made very few they made very few tweaks to the deck. 1 less island, 1 less fire magic, 1 additional Braid for the mirror match, and 1 additional mountain. So not a whole bunch has been changed there, and also took down another first place. So 2 first places on one weekend. Shows you that Izzet Cauldron, especially in the hands of a capable pilot, is very well positioned. So we're dropping the Braid from the sideboard. We're dropping the 2 Magebane Lizards, which I kind of like because there's not a whole lot of double spelling going on. This deck does eventually start double spelling, but it's nowhere near like Izzet Prowess was at the beginning. And instead we're running an additional copy of Annul. I like that. It's more centered around eliminating the piece that is going to win in the mirror match. We've got the Obliterating Bolt as a way to exile problematic threats. And then we've got the Torch the Tower, which again, the 4th copy of Torch the Tower, I think you're going to bring that in when you're on the draw and you're up against another aggro matchup and you're trying to slow them down. Okay, totally blitzed through Best of 3. It'll switch over in time. I'll spend less time on Best of 1 and spend more time on Best of 3 as Best of 1 will get more repetitive as time goes on. That's generally what we see. So thanks for listening to my ramblings. To close things off here for us is the 15th archetype, which is Simic Midrange by DJ BPM Pwns, BMP Pwns, Bitmap Pwns. Anyway, so this one is centered around the combination of the Gene Morph Imago, which if you do a landfall, you can turn something into a 3/3. If you have 6 or more lands, you can turn something into a 6/6. Either one works really well for turning the Ouroboros into a bigger creature that gives X +1/+1 counters equal to its power to your entire board. So if you turn this into a 6/6, it's going to give everything +6/+6. And if you know Uncle Cardboard from Draft, when I played in early access, they accomplished this combo against me in early access, and can verify it. It hurts for sure. So the rest of it is kind of like some of the stuff we saw in Simic Artifacts, right? Like the Spyglass Siren, we've got the Sentinel of the Nameless City. I'm actually a little bit surprised with these two that we don't see Zoetic Glyph. I think we still have that one because that was the Lost Caverns of Ixalan card. Could be an interesting one to explore. Anyway, we've got Paw Patch Recruit to kind of punish some of the single point interaction, Bushwhack for removal or finding lands. Land of War Elves helps us ramp into our higher curve. We've got, Sentinel of the Nameless City is nice for answering things like the Screaming Nemesis, right? Like that 3/4 stat block can just answer certain things. We've got the Subterranean Schooner, like we used to see in Simic Artifacts over a year ago, like prior to, last year's rotation. Flood Pit's Drowner from like the Tempo decks and Dimir Midrange. Bristly Bill for a little bit of counter synergies. Endless Enduring Curiosity to give us some card advantage off of some of our early threats. And then, like I said, the combo that's actually coming from Edge of Eternities, Breeding Pools, the Shockland for Simic. And then sideboard here, we've got Heritage Reclamation. This one is your Artifact and Enchantment Hate. Gives you a little bit of Graveyard Hate if they're doing something like the Azorius Omniscience strategy, which I think didn't survive rotation. Tishana's Tidebinder for the Izzet Cauldron decks, Surak if they're also running a lot of single point interaction or removal, Repulsive Mutation if they're weak to counter spells. This one can be a fun one. I'm not sure it's like, I think you can do better with it than this, honestly, but it's a fun one when you are in Simic, and this was kind of a fun new deck anyway. 4 copies of Unable to Scream also helps out against things like Screaming Nemesis. Scavenging Ooze gives us additional Graveyard Hate if the Heritage Reclamation is not enough. And then, 3rd copy of the Repulsive Mutation. So thank you for listening to my ramblings. I hope it finds you well. I hope it gives you ideas for your own crafts, your own ideas for either best of 1 or best of 3. Again, if you're completely new, I will be working on my budget beginners list kind of guide. It will probably have to wait until the end of Edge of Eternities as we kind of figure out what commons and uncommons are working best. And then I do highly recommend, again, can't say it enough, don't craft unless you're sure of it. I think it's safer to probably hold off until week 2 or week 3, where we'll start to see a little bit more of a stabilization in the meta. But it's always kind of hard when everyone's excited about the new cards to do that. So again, if you want to help support me and my shenanigans every week, the best way to do that is by becoming a YouTube member. I will be opening up the community deck tech eventually, so look for that in the community posts. Priority will be given to YouTube members if you want my thoughts on some of your decks and some of your brews. So I'm sure all of you have been having a blast with Edge of Eternities and the new archetypes. I will also hopefully be able to cover some more of the additional archetypes that weren't in the top 8 today, in either best of 1 or best of 3, like Temur Battlecrier, right? Like there's a bunch of new archetypes that just haven't made it onto the tracker yet, so don't worry, they're coming, and if they're not coming, I'll do my best to talk about them on Sundays. So take care, everybody, and I will see you on Sunday to talk about the Meta Breakers. And with that, I will leave you be. Have a good one. Take care.